When learning through place and studying the city of Bristol, we were especially interested in the city's colonial past and its links to the transatlantic slave trade. Through research into slave trade in the city, we then began to question the availability of this knowledge to the public, asking, how can people find out about Bristol's slave trade past? A simple Google search using this question led us to discover that one's willingness to confront past slavery in Bristol can be done by going on a walking tour. Through research into the established route, along with our experiences when visiting Bristol, we were then led to further question what wasn't included in the trail and the possible reasons and effects of these choices. Further into this rabbit hole, we began questioning subjectivity within the availability of knowledge surrounding slavery in the past, especially looking at whose voices and opinions have or haven't been heard. An interesting piece of academic literature that we found whilst researching the accessibility of knowledge regarding Bristol's colonial past was a 2010 article, Slavery Heritage in Bristol, History, Memory and Forgetting, by Rebecca Casbeard. This article deepened our interest in the availability of resources to acknowledge Bristol's past by discussing key issues and concepts of meaning, misrepresentation and representation, invisibility and visibility, inclusion and denial in the slave trade trail. Despite recognising the effectiveness of visual ways to analyse, organise and experience history, Casbeard also highlighted issues such as the marginalised recognition of slavery heritage, misrepresentations when addressing Colston's associations with slave trade, and contrasting examples of some buildings preserving the past, whereas others have changed names and functions. From this paper, we were inspired to further question the themes Casbeard introduced relating to our line of inquiry of the accessibility of knowledge of Bristol's past. This shows the effectiveness of referring to academic literature to form research questions.
The slave trail we looked at was developed by the RGS and includes 6 stops which have historical connections to the trade. These are Guineas Street, which was home to several well-known slave traders, and the Hole-in-the-Wall pub, which has a spy house where press gangs operated for the Royal Navy to kidnap sailors to work on slave ships. There is also Perry's Bridge, named after a slave brought to live in Bristol in 1783, and NatWest Bank on Corn Street, which is one of the oldest banks that held money generated from slavery and gave loans to slave voyagers. Colston Hall was also included in the stops, as it was named after the merchant Edward Colston, who lived in Bristol up until the Civil War, and who owned shares in the Royal African Company. Finally, the last stop was the Georgian Museum, which is testament to the wealth of those who profited from slavery, as it was built by Perry's owner John Pliny. As we walked around the city, we found other spaces which we deemed significant in Bristol's slave trade narrative, but weren't included in the trail. This led us to question what else wasn't included in the tour, and how this may affect the accessibility of knowledge of Bristol's past slave trade to the public. This is a question that could be answered by surveying Bristol's citizens about their knowledge on slavery and also their opinions of the availability of it. Some places that particularly interested us and help us to get a better understanding of Bristol's slave trade were Colston's Plinth, the Harbourside and the M-Shed. The first stop we thought should be included into the trail is the Plinth, previously holding the statue of Edward Colston, which was removed by the public on the 7th of June 2021 after years of formal attempts to remove it, and also the digital scanner next to it. This stop is significant as it dictates the opinions of the public on slave trade in the present. It also raised many questions such as will the plinth be taken down, will something else be placed on top, and what this could be. These questions could be answered by a Google search or by interviewing the council and other authorities in charge of the plinth's future. The scanner is called People's Platform and takes you to a website from a QR code showing alternative suggestions for what could be on top of the plinth. It allows people to virtually see different art forms submitted by the public and was developed by a team at Cargo Movement, who make the designs into 3D. These included the colourful head shown in the right of the picture. This prompted us to ask more questions about what should be on the plinth next. We found that from a Bristol Live survey, the majority of people wanted to see something replace it. 29% wanted the plinth left as a monument to the protests, 13% wanted it removed, 28% wanted another person on it, and 16% selected other. In addition, more than 150 people said they liked Banksy's design, which would see Colston reinstated, but surrounded by statues of protesters pulling him down, and this is shown on the left.
Following on from the plinth, we followed the pathway that the protesters took as they dragged the Colston statue through central Bristol. The relationship between present-day society and history is clearly represented through inclusive societal growth, and the importance of highlighting aspects of history that are no longer socially acceptable is made clear through the actions of the protesters. Colston has often been recognised for his seemingly noble charitable acts and donations, despite his involvement in the enslavement of 84,000 Africans, this again highlighting the increased recognition for certain aspects of history. The irony of the location is ever present, as the harbourside was a key location in the movement of trade, including slave trading. Next to the location is Pharaoh's Bridge, this adding to the irony as it recognises the history of a slave who was previously marginalised like so many others, this suggesting the huge contrast in recognition that slaves have received throughout history in comparison to slave traders like Colston. We can recognise again here the relationship between present-day society and history, the societal growth obvious. Next to the location where the statue was overthrown, a plaque appeared overnight to mark the first anniversary of the statue's removal. A group calling themselves the Guerrilla Historians claimed responsibility, and from this we began to question representations of history. Who decides what's represented in history? Has this changed over time? To answer this, we could do further research into key figures represented as major parts of Bristol's history and the similarities these figures have when opposed to those who are historically underrepresented. After the protests and statue removal, the MShed created an exhibition on Colston. We thought this would be a relevant place to visit next on our rabbit hole journey, following on from where public opinion seemed to force a change in historical recognition. It included signs and memorabilia from the protests, the Colston statue itself, graffiti covering the statue, and an extensive amount of information relaying the truth about Colston's past, a history that has not always been recognised fully. Educational purposes, such as this exhibition, allow society to grow and develop in an inclusive way, learning from the city's past heritage and history. The museum also presented public opinion as part of the exhibition. The results of a Bristol Live survey are displayed in the exhibition, one result stating that 56% of respondents agreed with the statement, "The protesters were right to pull it down and drop it in the harbour." Our exploration of this educational resource led us to question the extent to which this education can drive change within society in Bristol as a city. Are public opinion and protests the only ways that help create this education? Is this the first instance of public opinion changing physical aspects of Bristol or its laws? To answer these questions, we could look to sources of public opinion, such as from TripAdvisor. In terms of education, we could try to discover the extent to which topics such as Bristol's heritage is included in education in schools. It was these possible topics of exploration that led us to question how Bristol should recognise actions of the past.
After we looked at these stops, we were then interested to look at examples of disproportional balances of power in terms of who had a voice in the past, i.e., has slaves been portrayed consistently throughout history, and what examples of this could we find? Prior to World War I, most of the literature around this topic was run through the state and the church, both of which can manipulate and censor information which went out. Because they made a lot of money out of slavery, not many controversial comments were printed, and so Colston's history was surmised to his contribution to Bristol life. For example, the statue of Edward Colston was erected in 1895 to commemorate his philanthropy and donations to schools, hospitals and churches. The publication of Derek Johnson's A Shocking History of Bristol in 1973 was read by the public and not censored by the government and the church, so it caused upset. This also gave historians in the following decades more scope to openly criticise Colston and others. An example of this was in 1981 when David Foote wrote an article saying that Colston grew fat and rich whilst conveniently ignoring the morality of what he was doing.
In conclusion, our rabbit hole journey has effectively introduced us to methods available to learn about Bristol's past involvement in the slave trade. We were most interested in slave trade trails, and through research, Google searches and reading academic literature, we were led to further question the stops not included, as well as the possible effects of this. Visiting Bristol and embarking on our own slave trade trail to include stops at the site of Colston's plinth, Bristol's harbourside and the MShed therefore alerted us of the key locations connected to Bristol's past which may be overlooked when following a slave trade trail in Bristol. Websites such as TripAdvisor or surveys such as the poll on the future of Colston's plinth provided insight into public opinion on these locations and can therefore be used to analyse and explore the effects of missing out these locations in walking tours. Finally, this imbalance of the availability of knowledge in slave trade trails led us to further question subjectivity, asking, where does this knowledge come from?